All right.
Well, speaking of Albert Breer, the reason why I just brought that up is because he had a great, long breakdown of the entire Bears courting and researching of Caleb Williams that led to the pick. It was very well done, and talked to both Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus. Bunch of little nuggets. Some of the stuff we knew, some of the more specifics we didn't. I know, Carm, that you've probably spent the most time kind of really diving into this. Did you have any like big takeaway you wanted to get to first?
No, I mean, overall, I just think when you read it, you just feel confident that Ryan Poles is doing the right things when it comes to building this roster, which we've seen mainly in the locker room. You have a lot of just really good dudes in there. You can't really turn anywhere and find somebody that you don't like, with the one exception being Chase Claypool, who was here for all of 5 seconds. Right. I mean, they got that guy out of there. They got him out of there as quick as possible, admitted the mistake, and moved on. That was an awkward stop.
It was, but I think the more and more time we get away from that, we actually acknowledge that as evidence that this whole thing's working. Because you're not going to bat 1,000 as a GM. You're going to make mistakes. Some are going to be more glaring than others. That was a glaring mistake. And it kind of set the tone from an accountability standpoint. I actually thought it took a week too long for them to make the move, but they did it. So I think that helps in the locker room. And then on top of it, it just shows a willingness to be, to say when you're wrong and move on and not be stubborn about it.
Right, and he talked about trading for Montez last year and how, he worked around the building and people told him don't be shy and get back in there.
For it. Keep swinging.
And he did. Shout out to, I thought National Scouts Francis St. Paul and West Coast Area Scout Reese Hicks, they were mentioned in the piece, who kept telling Poles that he needed to, quote, go back out to California and around the people at UAC. He find out they promised that the narratives that circled Williams while the Trojan season circled the drain weren't real. Investigate it yourself. They said, read our reports, investigate it. So the whole Hollywood thing, which you hear Poles talk about, and you heard him talk about as far as like 4 months ago, that he's actually opposite that he is much more interested in playing football than being in commercials or living, quote-unquote, the Hollywood lifestyle. So, I mean, the scouts were telling him that. He went down that road, and then he became somebody basically telling everybody that this is not who that guy is. He's telling that to Bears players. Hey, when you meet him, this is what it's going to be.
Well, right, because at the same point in that article, they said, they tasked all the coaches that were going to the All-Star games to ask every player that played with him or played against him or coached against him, like ask anybody that has any kind of connection to Caleb about him, which that was stuff we were doing as well when we were going to these events, Senior Bowl and everything else, in Combine, and asking those connections. And to a man, everyone had great things to say about Caleb.
Yeah, he writes, Poles assigned one of his scouts to call opposing coaches in the Big 12 and the Pac-12, in particular defensive coordinators who game planned against him. And then Poles is quoted, that's where things started to turn. You started to get this feedback from players at the All-Star games who were like, quote, I love this guy. I was in a rut, and he helped pull me out. He's a dude. He's selfless. He takes care of his teammates before he takes care of himself. I mean, those are high-level human qualities right there. That's big-time stuff right there. Two opposing defensive coordinators, quote, we had to change everything before we played him. And then Poles is saying, if you're doing that, that tells you enough about the kid's talent. So, and then Eberflus gets in there. They talk about the variance of speed on the football.
Yeah, that was very interesting. That to me was one of the more interesting things that I hadn't heard before, where they talked about what you said. Like, most people's margin of variance is like 4 miles an hour on a throw.
Yeah.
And his was 10 miles an hour. And was that on just short throws or just any throw in general? They were talking about his control of understanding.
Yeah, were they timing like game throws on that, or what were they? When were they timing that?
I'm not.
It was just something listed in the story.
Yeah. Well,
but
it didn't specifically say here. I pulled it out of there.
Well, it doesn't really matter. But
But
this came up on Hogan Johns yesterday too. It's like where someone asked us to pick like what's the number one attribute that stands out above the rest with Caleb, and to me that's the one I picked, was just the different types of throws. Like, he's just got so many clubs in the bag, and even good quarterbacks don't necessarily have more than 3 to 4 different throws that they really lean on. With Caleb, it's multiple different arm slots, and even on deeper throws, like sometimes you see the moon ball, other times you see it more on a line. But that's going back to what you're talking about, though, with the speed variance, because I hadn't really thought about it that way until this was in the story. That makes sense, because to have touch, to have a strike right down the middle, you can't throw it hard, Zach Edey.
Right.
You got to take some pace off it to get it to Lucas Giolito's glove correctly, And that's what Caleb does.
Well, that's what he said, like on some of the back shoulder fades, like sometimes you got to throw it hard, sometimes you got to have a little touch on it. And Caleb understands the difference in the situations when to change those up. So, to me, that those were things that stood out. I think the other thing that stood out was, when we talk about winners and losers here earlier in the show, I think a big loser from this article are all the people that tried to make the Notre Dame game the alarm to ring off to why to not draft Caleb, when Ryan Poles looked at it exactly the opposite of that.
So
that just shows that he was already in love with him, by the way.
Yeah, so I want to push back on that a little bit, because, and we won't know the answer to this really for some time, but one of the hardest things about going through these long stretches of evaluation before the draft is you kind of you kind of have your own confirmation bias,
right?
And we all, whether it's us, or because I wrote that story back at the Super Bowl, and all these people basically tell me that this stuff was BS, and like I was trying to fight that too. Like, even what I wrote sometimes, to be like, well, I can't just take this as like the gospel, because somewhere at some level there's somebody who did have a problem with him here. Like, it just doesn't come out of nowhere. Like, you know what I mean? But obviously, and this was, I think, reiterated in the story, when the dust all settled on this and you did talk to as many people as you could, most of it was BS. Like, maybe he's not the highest regarded teammate of all time, but no one really has a problem with him, right? Like, most of his teammates love him.
Right.
So is it unanimous? Probably not, but it rarely ever is unanimous. So there's just, anyway, getting back to the Notre Dame game, there's parts of what Ryan Poles was talking about that I can get on board with. Like, the fact that Notre Dame changed their entire defense basically for that game to stop them is an enormous compliment. It is also a valid explanation for his challenges in that game and some of the struggles. That game was definitely the exception to the rule in Caleb Williams' college career. And in the context of understanding what really happened and what Notre Dame did, I do agree that, like, those can't all be spun positively.
Sure.
Going as far as, and this was the lead in the story, like, it really impressed Ryan Poles that he went up to Joe Montana and said hi. I was like, okay. Like,
no, I think
like
more so how he conducted himself
Yeah.
when the things weren't going right, because his tape is full of positives.
Yeah.
So Ryan, I'm sure, would have loved to see him throw 7 touchdowns that night, right? He went to see, and they documented this in the Albert Breer piece, how he went to every quarterback and saw them live in person and saw the way they acted on the sidelines and were with their teammates and stuff. So, when you see them in a losing effort in a tough game, maybe his toughest game as a college player, then now you're evaluating that, how he handles himself in that moment. So to me, that you don't get many opportunities to like really see the the cut of his cloth, to see how he is as a leader when the chips are down, because he's going to go through those moments in Chicago. And that was what Justin was great about, is never too high, never too low, and was always a great leader. And his teammates always rallied around him, whether the team was going good or bad. So seemed like that's what Ryan saw in Caleb on the sidelines at the Notre Dame game.
The Fields part of the article, for the record, I found to be kind of comical too. Like, I loved the Poles part of it. Exit interviews, Poles told Fields that the situation the organization faced was unique in that, again, the team finished strong, but still the first pick. He pledged to be transparent and honest. Okay. And then there's a comment from the Flus.
Where he's like, we're still going to be friends.
We're still going to be friends. Can you imagine Justin Fields on the phone listening to Matt Eberflus saying that we're still going to be friends?
And they can't
take buddy.
The relationship we built, they can't take that away from us.
We thanked him for his leadership, for the work ethic, and just the man he is, how he's been a wonderful guy, Eberflus said. I just told him, hey, I really enjoyed our relationship together last couple of years. That certainly doesn't end here. The relationship that he and I built over the first couple of years is special, and no one can ever take that away from us.
Yeah. You can't, Carm. Don't try. You're trying right now.
That just
don't take it away from him. You're trying right now.
You are trying to take that away from him.
Don't take it away from him.
I think the other two big takeaways I had from the article were,
they're never going to speak again.
I don't know about that.
They will. If they run into each other, I'll bet they'll talk. But I guarantee you, there's never a phone call. Justin, when he gets on the field next year for the Steelers and he has some great game, he ain't calling up the Flus to celebrate it.
Brady
I
and Belichick were on the stage together the other night. The roast of Tom Brady. Maybe someday we'll get the. Maybe someday Matt Eberflus will have 6 Super Bowl rings. And there'll be the roast of Matt Eberflus, and Justin Fields is the first guy up there to roast him.
Mm-hmm. Maybe they'll be at a summer home this come June when things are a little slow, and they'll just be hanging out on a paddle boat together, talking about how it would have been sweet if they could have been on that paddle boat together in Arlington Heights if the stadium deal ever gets done.
The other two big takeaways I had from it were that Keenan Allen wasn't asked by Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus to come to Caleb Williams' pro day. He did that on his own volition, so that was cool. And then the other one was what they termed as the leadership committee that Caleb met with, from the Bears players when he came for his pro day in Chicago, or not his pro day, his 30 visit. And Cole Kmet obviously being one of those, TJ Edwards, Tevin Jenkins. That surprised me, just like from and DJ Moore, I think, was the other guy. So I thought that was interesting that they were dubbed as the leadership committee, and Tevin is on that. Which, I mean, Tevin is a leader for sure. Like, he plays with a lot of brute force, but it was interesting to see that he was one of the players selected to be in that dinner.
Good job by SI. That was an outstanding job by Albert Breer and company.
We all silly like the mayor.